a fictitious restaurant, an upscale restaurant that you would expect to find in a busy city or downtown area. So in part one, we set up the project and then we incorporated a theme and we set up some Gulp tasks to optimize the CSS delivery. We didn't complete that process for the JavaScript, so we should do that right now and then move on to actually adding some content and filling out the actual content of the website. So that's what we're going to do in this video. So that's it. Let's get started. So here is where we left off in part one. I'm going to make a minor adjustment here. You see how in the CSS vendor task we have the output going into the dist vendor directory. I'm going to change that to just dist CSS. The main reason being the name of the file is already vendor.min.css, so it doesn't need its own directory. That'll just make it more confusing. So what I'm going to do is remove the dist and rebuild. So Gulp style is the name of the task. So now here it is in the same directory as style.min. Don't forget to go back to your head partial and make the corresponding adjustment here, otherwise it won't work. So let's run the dev server and make sure everything still looks good. Looks the same, everything looks good. Okay, so now let's go ahead and run the same process for the JavaScript. If you look at the imports.mustache, you'll see a handful of JavaScript files that also should be optimized. Same process, concatenate, minify, strip it down to as minimum number of files as you can. So you'll see that most of these are from the vendor directory. So I'm going to separate those out just like I did with the CSS. So let's grab all these. I'm going to create the JavaScript task first. Same as last time, I'm just going to take it from a previous project. So let's see here. So here in our Gulp file, let's go down to the bottom and create a new task. Let's get rid of all this stuff that we don't need. And let's call this JS vendor because this is specifically for the vendor folder. And just like before, it's going to concatenate, it's going to minify, or in this case called uglify, same thing. It's going to create a vendor.min.js and then put the results in the dist/js directory. So now we need to specify what files to do that for. So we grab all of these and copy these, and let's do that process again down here. So there's quite a few, so just create a series of entries and let's go ahead and do it again. So here is the jQuery import. Okay. Let's get rid of these two. Now this is not a file, this is a script that runs on page load. So we actually want to put that back inside the imports all the way down the bottom here, so that this script will run when the page loads. And so we want to leave it like that. But since it's not in its own file, we can't add it to the Gulp task. It won't work. So we need to continue here and just do what we did before. There's a few more files here than for the CSS, so this is a little bit more tedious. But like I said in the first video, it's important to understand how everything is put together from the bottom up, so that if there's ever any problems, which there inevitably will be, you know where to look and how to make adjustments. Or even if you just want to make changes, you don't want to be in a position where you're afraid to make changes because you don't know how everything is put together. That's not really a good spot to be in as a programmer, especially if you are the only programmer. So if you're a contract developer, freelancer, which is essentially what this video is targeted for, you don't want to be in a position where it's hard to make small changes. because then your client gets very impatient, everything gets expensive, etc., etc. So that's no good. So here we are almost done getting all the import files over. Looks like I'm short by a few, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that should do it. And then let's get these remaining 5 or 6 in here. Alrighty, almost done. Okay, so let's get rid of these. Now this task is called JS vendor, right? So we want to run that task individually. So let's give it a run and see what happens. Gulp JS vendor. And then here is the JS directory in the vendor.min, and here is your output, your minified and concatenated output file. So it's taking a little bit long to load because it's probably very large, but that's it. And here it is. Okay, yeah, it's pretty big because this theme in particular imported a ton of JavaScript jQuery stuff. So we're good to go there. Now let's go back to our imports and let's get rid of everything except what we didn't add to the script, the task. So we want to do that, and then it's dist /js /vendor.min.js. That's this guy right here, and that simply represents all the other JS files now concatenated. So that's a better way of handling this. So let's make sure that this even works. So turbo dev server. Cool. Everything still looks good. Everything works. Don't worry about these image imports. We will take care of these shortly, but everything else looks pretty good. Yeah, and let's check the source code to make sure we have the right import. And there it is. So everything worked on that end. Now this last import right here should also be handled in a similar fashion. It's not really, it's poor form to, not do that across the board. So let's go ahead and make that final adjustment. Let's do JS main on that. So I'm copying and pasting the vendor task, and I'm removing everything and calling it JS main. And we'll call that main.min.js. Put it in the same directory, and then we'll do that main.js, which is simply this file right here. And let's run that as a combined script. So there's style, and then I'm going to create another one called just JS, which will be JS vendor and JS main. So now we can just run JS, so gulp JS, which will run both of those tasks in sequence, so vendor and then main. And then now we can check here and we see we have the main and the vendor. And the order does matter here, so we have to maintain the same order, so it's dist.js.main.min.js right here. It may seem kind of peculiar, like why are we doing all that just for one? If we open up the main.js here, you'll see that it's not minified. So that's poor form. We want to minify it and strip out any excess variables and things like that. So that's good to go. So now we can test it again and make sure everything still works. I'm just going to be consistent with this right here. That's better. All right, so let's test it one more time. Great, looks good. Everything is still running. Check the imports. Very nice. So now we're down to just a handful of imports, 2 on the CSS and 2 on the JavaScript, which is very nice as opposed to what we had earlier, which is like 25 or 30. Way too much. That's really not good. That's really not good form. So let's go ahead and let's see here. Okay. Now we have a series of tasks here in the Gulp file, which we're right now running individually, so that's not good. So we want to write one sort of master task that runs everything. So I'm going to create a Gulp default task, which is simply going to do style and JS. So the default task is if you do Gulp and then nothing else. And then we're also going to create another one called Gulp prod, which is the production build task. So let's go ahead and run Gulp prod. Let's remove the dist directory entirely and run the Gulp prod task. Prod is for production, and let's make sure everything runs successfully. Dist, CSS, got our style, our vendor, we have our fonts, we have our JS, main and vendor as well. Let's run the dev server. Reload the home page and make sure everything still works, which it does. Very nice. So one more thing, normally you don't run these from Gulp directly, you run these as an npm script. So what you want to do is go back to our package.json and write a build script which will do all this. So I'm just going to grab that from another project as well. So the build script will simply run those tasks for us. So let's go ahead and write our build script like this. So here we have a build script that runs npm clean and then runs the production build for Gulp. Now we have a clean script which we didn't define, so this will actually crash. So we have to put in a clean script, which simply removes the dist directory from the public folder. So the clean script, the clean script will remove the previous dist build and insert a whole new one, giving you a fresh build every time you run the build script. So you want to do that because sometimes there's residual files left behind and stuff that you want to get rid of. So now instead of running Gulp directly, what you want to do is npm run build, and pay careful attention to what happens over here now. So watch what happens. See, everything goes away and it rebuilds the entire project based on the Gulp tasks that we defined in video 1 and the first half of this video. And now if we take a look, everything is back, and that's exactly what we want to see. So now we want to run the dev server again and just make sure yet again everything still works. Great. And then we have a couple broken image imports here. We'll take care of that in a second. But for now, everything looks good. So one more thing we're going to do is we're going to do a quick deploy. And make sure everything works on the staging environment. I will pause this part so you don't have to sit through this. Okay, so the deploy just wrapped up. Took about a minute and a half or so. And here it gives you that staging link again. It's the same one as before. So let's go ahead and head over to the staging environment and make sure everything works over there as well. And it does. So everything works on staging, everything works on local, everything just works. So if you look at the source code of the staging link right here, you'll see we have our dist vendor and style CSS as well as our JavaScript versions. So if you click on one right here, the first one, the important thing to notice is this CDN right here. What's happening is that Turbo automatically takes your static assets and places it behind a global CDN. So in reality, what you want to do is reference the CDN. So if you go back to your head tag, instead of just putting in this, what's called a relative file path, you want to put in the entire CDN file path like that. And that way, the reason you want to do that is because by putting in a relative file path, you're making a web request to the actual Turbo environment, which counts against your quotas. If you make a direct reference to the CDN, that does not count against your quotas, which are basically free requests to a CDN. So you want to take advantage of that as much as you can. So here is the style.min.css. So you want to do the same thing over here. So if I run this on localhost, so if I go back to localhost now, everything continues to work as expected, but the CSS files are now coming from the CDN. So hopefully that makes sense. The CDN is basically the same up to here. So what we really want to do is pass that through as a variable in the data tag. So if you go back to the index route, very early in the first video, you may recall we passed in a data object into the template, which we're really not using. It was just an example. So what we want to do is create a CDN variable that encapsulates all of this. So we can do that as our CDN variable. And then that way, inside the head tag, we can just put in the placeholder CDN like that. And that's much easier to maintain. And so if we reload the site on localhost, it's still there, but we're using the data from the route file, and that's considered much better architecture. So then we want to do the same thing on the imports as well. So same process, we just do that, and that'll take care of it. And let's just double confirm that back here. Run localhost. Everything still looks good, and then check the paths. So that looks good, and that looks good, and the site still works. Everything still works. So we are good to go on that. This is considered much more optimal. Like I said, it saves requests on the Turbo, on your Turbo quotas. So you want to reference the CDN as much as you can. We want to take that as far as we can go. So if we go to our, if we go to our source and click on this, forgot to run the dev server. Actually, if we go to the staging link, so let's find our staging link. So here's my project dashboard. If you just click on staging, it'll go right to your staging link. And then click on the view source and click on this. Same deal. It gives you basically a siloed CDN folder that you can use. So we can just grab the CDN um, and put that right here like that. And that should create the corresponding effect. So let's go ahead and test that. And there it is. So cool. Let's move on now. So everything is now properly prepared. It's well optimized. It's ready to go from an architectural standpoint. Actually, this CDN right here, we want to make that a global environment variable. So if we go to the env file, there already is a CDN entry. We want to replace that with the proper CDN, and then here we want to use the env file. The reason is because the CDN is a global property. It's not going to change anywhere in the project. So you want to just pass that through and then make sure that that works. Make sure that that works. Cool. Everything still looks good. So now what we spent the first video and a half doing is basically preparing the project and the template for optimal delivery. This project is now much more efficient. It's much more better architected for a production scale environment. You're not making unnecessary requests. You're not wasting bandwidth on unoptimized code, things like that. So it may seem like a lot, but it's sort of a one-time setup, and then now you can start programming. So what we want to do now is start plugging in some actual content specific to the restaurant itself. So let's open up the index.mustache file, and let's start plugging through some of this stuff. So here is slide 1. I'm going to get rid of this video for now because it's sort of distracting. I'm just going to get rid of it. So line 22, I'll just leave that on sort of a scrap piece of paper right here. And then let's reload. Okay, so here we have some slides, and they give you the dimensions that you need to optimize for this particular thing. So that's probably slide 1 JPEG. So let's see here. Yes, so 1900 by 1000. So let's see if we can find a good image on Unsplash restaurant. So we want to be considerate of the image here. If you look at the actual text overlays, they are white, right? So we want to find a dark image to provide some natural contrast with that text. It's a very common mistake that people make who are just starting out. For example, this would be pretty good, but they don't consider those dynamics. So these would be bad images. This would not be a good idea, neither would this. You want to find something like this. This is actually pretty nice. So maybe we'll use that. Let's see. Okay. May seem like I'm spending a little too much time on this, but the aesthetic is extremely important. I've said it many times in my videos. You are judged on your appearance more than you probably think you should be. So although this isn't really coding specific, if I pick a terrible image, it will reflect poorly on me as a developer, as a contract developer. So you really want to be thoughtful here. You want to put some real thought into this. So I'm going to go back to that picture of the egg, because I think that had the best combination of food and the dark contrast that we're looking for. So let's go ahead and download this guy. And if we look at the image size, it is 4,000 by 2743. That's plenty of room to work with. We need 1900 by 11. So what you want to do is open this up in some sort of image editor. I'm using Pixelmator because it's pretty cheap and easy to use. If you have your own preference, by all means, and just make the size fit. So here's the 1900 by 1303, and then I'm going to change the canvas size to 1100 on the height, and then I have no idea what this dish is called, so I'm just going to call this food. Okay, I'm going to call that entree. And then be aware that you want to compress your images. So open up a new tab, and I used compressor.io, which is pretty easy. But you don't want to transfer unnecessary bandwidth. So here I'm just compressing the image. Taking me from 2 megs to 200 kilobytes. It's about a 10-to-1 compression ratio. It's very nice. So now we have a more compressed version of the same image. And then let's import that into the project. So we have our base restaurant template here, public, images, and then entree. Great. So let's try that. Instead of slide 1, let's see what we get here. Very nice. Now, I kind of hit my mark, missed my mark a little bit right here with the egg because, or I don't think that's an egg at all. I'm not really sure what that is, but we still have too much white, white on white contrast. So what I'm going to do to account for that is add a slight gradient to cover for that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab that image back. So here it is. I'm going to open it up in Pixelmator again. And if you pay close attention, you'll see that we have too much white going on right here. So I'm gonna add what's called a gradient. And again, I know that this isn't really programming per se, but if you're going to go out on your own and become a contract developer, this is important. You actually do need to take be considerate of these things. Otherwise, it's hard to explain to a client that the code architecture is really good when in fact the actual aesthetic doesn't look very nice. So it may seem like I'm nitpicking here, but the idea behind this series is to explain the elements that you need to understand to actually get clients, right? So none of my clients ever asked me how RESTful my API was. Nobody ever really cared about that. So it's important to understand why I'm doing these things. So let's go ahead and download the compressed version. And let's try it again. Better, much better. It's a subtle difference, but it's enough to make the text pop out without losing too much of the richness of the image itself. So that's good. That's what you want. Alrighty, great. So let's see if we can change this logo now. So Eatery Deli, right here, it's called logo, and it is a (107 by 67) icon. So let's see here. see. Oh, there are more background images. So you know what? I'm going to leave that to you as an additional exercise. You don't need to watch me crop images for 20 minutes on this tutorial, but again, be aware that um, the overlay and the contrast between the image itself and the background is key here. So even this view menu, I'm not a big fan. So let's go back. Let's go down here and fix that. So where it says book a table, that's the BTN2 class, right? That's the filled in version. So let's do BTN2 on both of these, and let's make sure that they both look filled in, and that's better. So making it easier for the visitor to see all the content that you want them to see. So um, great. And our menus, upcoming events, and the footer. Great. So video is going a little bit long. I'm going to cut it off here, but in the next video, we're going to start incorporating custom content for the website itself. So rather than just swapping this stuff out for content that you decide, you pick, I mean, that's pretty pedestrian. That's not very sophisticated work. What we're going to do is make the content dynamic based on what the restaurant proprietor wants, what the owner of the restaurant wants, such that, yeah, he doesn't have to, or she doesn't have to contact you, the developer, every time they want to make a small change. That's been pretty much the single biggest request of my clients in the past 6 years, is that they struggle making small changes, and that they don't want to have to call me every single time they want to change a small feature here and there. And that's very reasonable, and I can certainly appreciate that. So we're going to work on that in the next video, such that all this data, not all of it, but most of it, will be rendered dynamically based on the configuration of the Turbo project. So that's going to be the main gist of the next